The telegraph lines sang wrong that autumn. Every operator from Fort Sully to Fort Rice knew it, though none would put the feeling into words that made sense. The wires carried their dots and dashes, same as always, but underneath ran something else, a low vibration that made seasoned men step back from their keys. I know because I was there, stationed at Fort Yates with the 7th Cavalry, transcribing dispatches that would never make it into any official record. Before we continue with what the Dakota Scouts saw on those endless grasslands, make sure you've subscribed and tell us where you're listening from. Your support helps preserve these forgotten accounts. Now, back to 1869, when the world was wider and darker than maps suggested. My name is Samuel Cray. I served as civilian translator and record keeper at Fort Yates from 1868 to 1871. I spoke passable Lakota and decent Arikara, learned from a childhood spent at trading posts along the Missouri. The Army hired me to help with the increasing number of reports coming in from Native Scouts, reports that didn't fit the standard categories of hostile movements or buffalo migrations. Reports that Lieutenant Colonel Brackett would read once, then lock in the bottom drawer of his desk with a peculiar expression I'd never seen on a military man's face before. Fear mixed with something else. Recognition, maybe. The first incident I translated came from a Dakota scout named Walks Farr, a lean man of middle years who'd worked with the Army for 3 seasons. He was reliable, never drunk, never given to tales. On September 15th, he came to the fort 2 days early from a routine patrol, his horse lathered despite the cool weather. He wouldn't speak to anyone but Brackett, and he kept looking at the sky, even though it was cloudless. I sat between them in Brackett's office, translating as Walks Farr spoke in short, careful sentences. He'd been following the Heart River, checking for hunk papa camps, when he noticed the buffalo acting strange. Not running, but standing perfectly still, all facing the same direction, northwest. The birds had gone quiet. The air tasted of copper, though no storm clouds showed. Then he saw it, moving across a distant ridge, a shadow that walked upright like a man, but stood 3 times taller. Its head bore antlers that branched like winter trees. It moved wrong, he said, not with steps, but with a flowing motion, as if the grass itself carried it forward. The shadow passed behind a hill, and immediately the wind began to howl. Within an hour, a storm struck with such violence that Walks Farr had to shelter in a cut bank for 2 days. Hail the size of river stones, lightning that struck the same spots repeatedly, turning sand to glass. Brackett listened without interrupting. When Walks Farr finished, the lieutenant colonel asked only one question. "Did it see you?" Walks Farr's answer made my skin crawl. It knew I was there. It chose not to look. Brackett dismissed us both, but told me to stay behind. He walked to his window and stood there for a full minute, hands clasped behind his back. Then he told me something that changed how I understood those vast plains. My grandfather served with Lewis and Clark, he said. Kept his own journal, separate from the official records. He wrote about something the Mandan told them, a walking storm that appeared before the worst weather. Said it had been crossing the plains since before memory began. The tribes knew to hide when they saw it. He turned to face me. "Start a separate log, Cray. Everything like this. Don't put it in the regular reports." Over the next weeks, more accounts came in. An Arikara scout named Young Elk reported seeing the shadow figure standing motionless on Sentinel Butte just before a blizzard struck in early October. impossible for the season. But it buried 3 supply wagons and froze 6 horses solid. The teamsters who survived swore they heard footsteps circling their snow-buried camp all night, each step sounding like thunder under the earth. Private McKinnon from B Company claimed he saw something tall moving between the barracks during a lightning storm. Said it stopped at each window and looked in, though he couldn't make out a face, just the outline of antlers against the electric sky. The next morning, every glass pane on the north side of the barracks showed long scratches, too high for any man to reach without a ladder. I started plotting the sightings on a map, marking dates and weather patterns. A shape emerged. The thing followed a rough circuit through the Dakota Territory, appearing just before severe weather events. But it wasn't random. The path curved around certain areas, avoiding some spots entirely, while returning to others repeatedly. When I showed Brackett, his face went pale. "Those are the sacred sites," he said quietly. "Every place it avoids is a native burial ground or vision quest site, and the places it returns to." He pulled out an older map from his desk, one marked with X's in red ink. "Those are where we've built forts, towns, railroad camps." He was right. The shadow figure seemed drawn to our intrusions on the land, bringing violent weather in its wake. Or perhaps, and this thought chilled me more, the storms came first, and it rode them like a shepherd drives his flock. The most detailed encounter came from an unexpected source. William Hay, a Presbyterian minister traveling between settlements, arrived at the fort in late October, seeking medical attention. His wagon had been overturned in a sudden windstorm, breaking his left arm. But it wasn't the injury that had left him shaken. I transcribed his account word for word while the doctor set his arm. He'd been traveling the old Badlands Trail, making for the settlement at Medora, when his horses stopped dead. No amount of urging would move them. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Then he saw it, walking toward him across the flat expanse. "It moved like smoke," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but solid, tangible. The antlers caught the last sunlight and looked like they were made of storm clouds themselves. Its body was shadow, but not absence of light. Rather, it was composed of a darkness that had weight and presence." The figure stopped 50 yards from his wagon. Hay said he tried to pray but couldn't remember the words. The thing raised one arm, too long, with too many joints, and pointed at the sky. Hay looked up to see clouds forming from nothing, spiraling into existence directly overhead. Then the figure pointed at him. "I understood then," Hay told me, gripping my wrist with his good hand. "It was giving me a choice. Leave, or be caught in what was coming." I turned my wagon around, rode hard as the horses would go. The storm hit an hour later. When I looked back, I saw 3 tornadoes touching down right where I'd been. They moved in formation, Mr. Cray, like soldiers on patrol. Hay left the next morning, said he was returning east. Before he went, he pressed a small leather journal into my hands. "I found this," he said, "in the ruins of an old trading post north of here. Thought someone should see it." The journal belonged to a French trapper named Baptiste Reynard, dated 1794. His entries, written in a mix of French and broken English, described the same figure. But Reynard had tried to follow it. His final entries, increasingly frantic, claimed the shadow figure wasn't bringing the storms. It was hunting something in them. something else that moved through the severe weather, hidden by wind and rain. November brought the worst encounters. 3 scouts, 2 Dakota, 1 Crow, reported seeing multiple shadow figures. Not one, but a group, moving in formation across the plains. They appeared just before the notorious winter storm of 1869, which official records blame for 37 deaths. What the records don't mention is the other thing the scouts saw, shapes in the blizzard itself, massive forms that moved against the wind, circling the settlements like wolves testing a herd. I was on duty the night the storm hit Fort Yates. The wind struck the walls with enough force to crack timber. Through the chaos of snow and ice, I saw them, the antlered shadows, standing in a ring around the fort. They didn't move for hours, just stood there while something else prowled between them and our walls. I couldn't make out what it was, but I heard it. We all did. A sound like breathing, if breathing could be the size of a canyon. Private Jensen, on watch duty, swore he saw one of the shadow figures strike at something in the storm. The impact sound broke windows a quarter-mile away. In the morning, we found massive furrows in the frozen ground, too large to be made by any animal we knew. The tracks led to the fort walls, circled 3 times, then headed back into the plains. But there were other marks too, the long stride marks of the shadow figures, following the deeper tracks like hunters on a trail. Waxfar came to me privately that December. He'd been talking to elders from various tribes, gathering stories. What he told me reframed everything. The horned shadows, he said, using a Lakota phrase that translated roughly to storm walkers, had been on the plains since the beginning. They were neither good nor evil, but served a purpose, keeping something else at bay. The storms were not their weapon, but their hunting ground. In severe weather, things could cross over from somewhere else. The shadows patrolled the boundaries, pushing back what tried to enter our world. But now, Waxfar said, there are too many of your people, too many buildings and rails and wires. The shadows have to patrol more places. They're spread thin, and the things they guard against are getting bolder. He showed me a piece of hide with pictographs, ancient from the look of it. It depicted the antlered figures standing in a line, facing outward against shapes that hurt to perceive even in symbolic form. Things with too many angles, with dimensions that folded wrong. Your people think the land is empty, Waxfar said, but it's full of old things that know how to wait. The storms wake them up. The horned shadows put them back to sleep. But what happens when there are more storms than shadows? That winter tested his theory. Telegraph lines reported unprecedented weather events across the entire territory. Blizzards, ice storms, and impossible thunders now that struck with increasing frequency. With them came reports. I couldn't put in any official log. Entire wagon trains found frozen in positions of running, though there was nowhere to run on the flat prairie. Homesteads where the inhabitants were discovered days later, alive but changed, speaking in languages no one recognized, and drawing the same symbol over and over, a spiral with too many curves. A cavalry patrol from Fort Rice went missing for 2 weeks. When they returned, they had no memory of the lost time, but their horses were different, wouldn't cross running water, shied at shadows that weren't there. The men themselves seemed fine until the next storm. Then they all walked out into it, calm as Sunday morning, and were never seen again. The only trace was a message one had scratched into the ice. They showed us what's coming. I started keeping my own journal, separate from even the hidden logs Brackett had ordered. I recorded every detail, every pattern, trying to understand the ecology of impossible things. The shadow figures appeared most often at liminal times, dawn, dusk, and during the pressure changes before storms. They were drawn to iron, railroad tracks, telegraph poles, anything that conducted electricity or magnetism. But they also appeared at natural features, certain rock formations, rivers' bends that curved just so, hills that broke the horizon at specific angles. Lieutenant Colonel Brackett grew increasingly concerned through December. He'd been corresponding with other fort commanders, all reporting similar phenomena. The War Department sent orders to cease recording anomalous weather events and associated folklore. But Brackett ignored them. He was mapping something larger, a pattern of sightings that extended beyond the territory, reports from Kansas, Nebraska, even as far as Montana. On December 20th, everything changed. A scout named Iron Horse rode in during a blizzard, his mount dying as it reached the gates. He'd been stationed at a forward observation post 30 miles north, watching for Sioux war parties. But what he'd seen sent him riding through a killing storm. I translated his words while he warmed by the fire, wrapped in blankets, but still shaking. The shadows are fighting something. Many shadows, many of the other things. The storm is not natural. It's a battlefield. They're using the wind and snow as weapons. But the shadows are losing. Brackett immediately ordered a detachment to investigate, but I convinced him to wait until the storm passed. That night, we heard sounds in the blizzard. Impacts that shook the fort. Roars that couldn't come from any earthly throat. And once, a cry like 1,000 elk calling at once. The temperature dropped so low that metal became dangerous to touch. Ice formed inside buildings, coating the walls with fractals that hurt to look at directly. At dawn, the storm broke. The sudden silence was almost painful. Brackett led a patrol north, and I rode with them. What we found at the observation post defied explanation. The small wooden structure was intact, but empty. Around it, the snow had been melted and refrozen in patterns, perfect spirals radiating outward for 100 yards. At the center of each spiral was a hole that went down beyond the reach of our longest ropes. But it was the tracks that disturbed us most. The long, distinctive marks of the shadow figures crisscrossed the area, dozens of them. And other tracks too, prints that changed shape between steps, as if whatever made them couldn't decide what form to take. Some looked like enormous paws, others like nothing that should exist. One set appeared to show something that walked on points, like a spider made of knife blades. We found Iron Horse's companion, a young scout named Beaver Tail, standing at the edge of the pattern. He was alive, but changed. His eyes reflected light like an animal's, and when he spoke, it was in a language that predated words. Brackett ordered him restrained and brought back to the fort, but he broke free that night with strength 10 men shouldn't possess. The last anyone saw, he was walking north into the plains, and the aurora borealis was dancing in the sky despite it being the wrong season. The attacks, for that's what they were, intensified through the end of December. Not on people directly, but on the boundaries between what was real and what should stay hidden. Telegraph operators reported messages in no known code. Railroad workers found tracks that ran for miles in perfect circles. A surveying team discovered that their maps were wrong, not in measurement, but in what existed. Hills that should be there weren't. Valleys that couldn't exist did. On December 28th, walks far brought disturbing news. The tribes were leaving, all of them. A great migration south and east, away from something they wouldn't name. The elders had read the signs and declared the northern plains cursed ground until the walking storms passed. How long will that be? I asked. Walks Far looked at me with pity. When your people leave, or when the shadows win their war, whichever comes first. That night I saw them clearly for the first time. A group of the horned shadows passed directly by the fort, close enough that I could make out details. They were beautiful and terrible, tall figures of living darkness, their antlers not bone, but condensed storm clouds that flickered with internal lightning. They moved with purpose, heading north toward a wall of approaching weather that shouldn't exist. A thunderstorm in December, green lightning crackling along its face. As they passed, one turned toward me. It had no face, just a smooth darkness where features should be. But I felt its attention like a physical weight. Information flooded my mind, not words, but understanding. The shadows were not of our world, either. They were older residents, from a time when the boundaries were thinner. They'd taken the role of guardians, not from kindness, but from necessity. If the things in the storms broke through completely, nothing would survive. Not them, not us, not even the memory of a world that made sense. The figure raised its too long arm and pointed at me, then at the approaching storm. I understood. It was offering the same choice the minister had received. Stay and likely die in what was coming, or run and live to bear witness. I chose to run. That night, I packed my journals and what records I could carry. Brackett found me preparing to leave, and instead of stopping me, he handed me a sealed envelope. For the War Department, he said, though I doubt they'll believe it. I'm evacuating the fort tomorrow, telling them we have a supply shortage. The men think I'm a coward, but dead heroes can't fight what's coming next. What is coming next? I asked. He looked out at the storm where flashes of light showed massive shapes moving against the wind. I don't know, but the shadows are buying us time to figure it out. The least we can do is not waste it. I left Fort Yates that night, riding hard for the railroad at Bismarck. Behind me, the storm struck with a fury that would make headlines as far away as Chicago. The official reports blamed the evacuation on supply line failures and hostile weather. They didn't mention the other things. The shapes found frozen in impossible positions, the perfect spirals of melted earth that appeared overnight, or the fact that compasses stopped working within 50 miles of the fort for the next 3 years. I traveled east, eventually reaching Washington, with my collection of records. The War Department took my report, filed it somewhere deep, and told me to forget what I'd seen. But forgetting isn't possible when you've watched gods walk the earth, fighting wars in storms, while humanity huddles in ignorance below. The shadow figures are still out there. I've tracked reports over the decades, always the same pattern. Tall shapes with antlers appearing before severe weather, standing guard against things that rational minds can't accept. They appear less frequently now, or perhaps we've gotten better at not seeing them. The storms they patrol have moved too, following the expansion of civilization westward, and then fragmenting as cities grew and electric lights pushed back the dark. But sometimes, in the hours before a particularly violent storm, people still report seeing them. Standing at crossroads, on the roofs of tall buildings, at the edges of airports, where the prairie used to run unbroken. Waiting, watching, holding the line against things that probe our reality from outside, looking for cracks, testing for weakness. I'm an old man now, writing this in 1923 from a small room in Baltimore. The other survivors are dead. Brackett in 1889, Walks Far in 1901, the others scattered by time and distance. But I keep watching the weather reports, tracking the patterns, noting when storms behave wrong. Last month, a tornado in Oklahoma changed direction 17 times. A blizzard in Montana fell upward for 3 minutes. A thunderstorm in Kansas produced ice that wouldn't melt, even in direct flame. The horned shadows are still fighting their war, in the spaces between lightning strikes and in the eyes of hurricanes. But there are fewer of them now, and the things they guard against are learning, adapting, finding new ways to push through. I don't know what will happen when the last shadow falls, or when the final storm breaks with nothing to hold back what hides inside it. I only know that on the Great Plains, in the year 1869, I saw the truth that civilization depends on, that our world exists because something stands guard at its borders, and that guard is growing thin. Some nights, when storms roll across the Chesapeake, I stand at my window and watch for antlers in the lightning. Once, just once, I saw them. A lone figure standing on the harbor wall, rain passing through it like it wasn't there. It turned toward my window, and I felt that same weight of acknowledgement from decades ago. It raised its hand to the storm, and for a moment I saw what it saw, shapes in the rain that writhed and pressed against some invisible barrier, trying to claw their way into our world. The shadow figure spread its arms wide, its antlers branching into fractal patterns that hurt to perceive, and pushed back. The shapes retreated, dissolving into ordinary rain and wind. Then the figure was gone, and I was left with the certain knowledge that humanity lives in a protected sphere we never knew existed. We build our cities, and wars, and telegraphs, never knowing that above us, around us, storms carry monsters that would end everything if not for the walking shadows that patrol the boundaries of the real. The Dakota scouts knew, the tribes knew. They respected the ancient compact. Stay quiet, stay small, don't draw attention from either the guardians or what they guard against. But we didn't listen. We built and expanded and lit up the night, and now the shadows have too much territory to patrol. I'll die soon, taking these memories with me. This account will be dismissed as the ramblings of an old man who spent too long on the frontier. But perhaps someone will read it and understand. Perhaps someone will see the connections between the increasing severity of storms and the decreasing sightings of the antlered figures. Perhaps someone will realize that our weather isn't becoming more violent by chance. It's becoming a battlefield where humanity's survival is decided by things we've forgotten how to see. Or perhaps it's better if no one believes. Hope, even false hope, is kinder than the truth I learned on those plains, that we are small, protected things, living in a bubble of ignorance, while titans fight in the storms above us, holding back a darkness that has been waiting since before the world had a name. The telegraph lines still sing wrong sometimes. Every operator knows it, though they've learned not to mention it. But I know what that sound is now. It's the vibration of the boundary between worlds, stressed by the constant pressure of things trying to break through. And one day, when the last horned shadow falls, and the final storm breaks unopposed, that boundary will shatter. What comes after that is beyond imagination. But until then, when you see storms behaving strangely, lightning that strikes upward, tornadoes that stop and wait, hail that falls in perfect patterns, know that something still stands guard. Something tall and dark with antlers made of storm clouds, fighting a war we never knew existed, buying us one more day in a world that makes sense. The Dakota Scouts called them the walking storms. I've come to think of them differently. I call them mercy, because without them, we would learn what waits in the spaces between thunderclaps, in the pause before lightning strikes, in the eye of every storm where reality grows thin. And that knowledge would end us more surely than any wind or rain. So I document this final account, seal it with wax and prayer, and consign it to archives that may never be opened. Let sleeping titans lie. Let walking shadows patrol in peace. And if you ever see antlers in a storm cloud, or a figure too tall to be human standing guard before catastrophe strikes, do what Walks Far taught me all those years ago. Lower your eyes, keep walking, and be grateful that something stands between us and the hungry darkness that waits in every storm. Some boundaries are meant to hold. Some wars are meant to be invisible. And some shadows are all that keep the light alive.